For nearly 30 years, one woman has been cast as the villain of Everest's deadliest disaster. But what if everything you think you know about her is wrong? This is Sandy Hill Pittman, and according to the world's media, she's the reason 8 people died on Mount Everest in May 1996. The headlines were brutal. Bored self-promoting housewife, princess of the peak. The New York Post, Vanity Fair, and countless other outlets painted her as everything wrong with modern mountaineering, a wealthy socialite who had no business on the world's highest mountain. But it was journalist Jon Krakauer who delivered the killing blow. In his best-selling book, Into Thin Air, Krakauer cast Sandy as a controversial figure, almost implicating her in the tragedy that claimed the lives of 2 experienced expedition leaders and 6 other climbers. May 16, 1996. Spring on Mount Everest was supposed to mark a new era. Seasoned guides were trading their expertise for hefty fees, leading eager adventurers to the roof of the world. The mountain had become commercialized, accessible to anyone with enough money and determination. Then, disaster struck. A vicious storm trapped exhausted climbers on their descent. Visibility dropped to near zero. Winds howled mercilessly. Time was crucial. Some climbers had pushed beyond the safe turnaround time, a decision that can mean life or death on Everest. Sandy Hill Pittman ended up in a group stranded on one of the most precarious parts of the mountain. Drop-offs of thousands of feet stretched to either side. As she would later describe it, they were swimming in a turbulent glass of milk, lost in blinding snow, mere feet from safety. 8 climbers lost their lives that night. And when the survivors began sharing their stories, the world turned its critical eye to Everest for the first time. The World Wide Web was gaining traction, and daily reports from base camp were being filed. More people were paying attention than ever before. Stories of courage, despair, and revelation emerged. But among all the survivors, one person became the focus of intense and polarizing debate: Sandy Hill Pittman, the woman the media decided was to blame. The narrative was simple and satisfying. Here was a privileged New York socialite who had bought her way onto Everest. She brought a cappuccino machine to base camp. She was updating her website during the expedition. She was supposedly dragged to the top by Sherpas. And after the disaster, critics claimed she was more focused on media interviews than mourning with her teammates. The digital world buzzed with opinions. Countless voices pointed fingers at Sandy, ignoring crucial factors like the brutal weather and critical decisions made by the team leaders. She became easy pickings, a symbol of everything wrong with commercialized mountaineering. Her image was distilled into that of an affluent socialite who had no place in the harsh Everest landscape. This oversimplified view seemed to fit perfectly with the story the media wanted to tell about rich clients endangering everyone else. For nearly 3 decades, this has been the accepted narrative. Sandy Hill Pittman, the villain of Everest's deadliest day, the woman whose privilege and inexperience contributed to one of mountaineering's greatest tragedies. But there was something the media didn't know about Sandy Hill Pittman, something that would completely change how we understand what happened on that mountain in 1996. Because the woman they painted as a pampered socialite had a secret that began when she was just 13 years old on a mountain peak in Wyoming. Sandy Hill's passion for mountaineering didn't begin in some Manhattan boardroom or at a charity gala. It ignited at age 13 with her first ascent of Disappointment Peak in Wyoming's Teton Mountain Range. "In the mountains I found freedom," she would later say. This love shaped her youth so profoundly that it influenced even her college choice, the University of Colorado, which she selected specifically because it was at high altitude. After college, Sandy moved to New York, married a non-mountaineer, and immersed herself in city life, drifting away from nature. But the confines of urban high society soon felt stifling. Craving a return to the wild, she embarked on a Himalayan trek to Annapurna's base camp, reigniting her connection with the mountains. This led to further adventures: horseback riding in Kenya, sea kayaking in the Arctic Circle. Her escalating passion for adventure prompted a career break. Eventually, she quit her job entirely. Supported by her husband, Sandy dedicated significant time to expeditions. But here's what the media conveniently ignored when they painted her as a dilettante. Sandy Hill Pittman was attracted by the rigorous physical challenge and teamwork that climbing demanded. After conquering her first significant peak, she made a vow: "I'm going to do this for the rest of my life." Many mountaineers dream of climbing the 7 summits, the tallest mountain on every continent. Sandy didn't just dream about it, she gave herself a deadline: reach all 7 summits before she turned 40. In 1992, she took her first steps toward this goal, choosing Aconcagua as her starting point. Not because it was easy, because it's the second highest mountain and one of the more difficult of the 7 peaks. "I wanted to test myself," she explained, before openly announcing my intention to do the rest of the summits. The conditions were brutal. Sandy endured blistered and bruised feet after just 2 days of walking. The swelling in her big toes grew to the size of eggs, so painful she had to soak them in the cold rivers hoping for relief. When that didn't work, she enlisted a fellow climber to puncture each toenail with a red-hot safety pin to release the accumulated fluid. And then she kept climbing. The wind was relentless. She found herself hacking out steps with her axe in crusty snow, with all but an outline of the leader's footprints wiped away by the elements. Above 22,000 feet, with the group well ahead of her, she grappled with the urge to sleep. Determined to reach the summit, she negotiated with herself. Walk 30 steps, then pause for 30 breaths. She dozed briefly at each break, leaning on her ski poles to support her head. 16 grueling days later, she stood atop the first of her 7 summits. Over the next few years, she systematically conquered peak after peak, along with countless other mountaineering adventures across North America. This wasn't the behavior of someone playing at being a climber. This was dedication bordering on obsession. In 1993, Sandy made her first attempt on Mount Everest via the South Col route. She couldn't get past 23,000 feet due to high winds and an early monsoon, but she was pleased with her ability to meet the physical challenge of the mountain. After that experience, she thought of little else. All she wanted was to get to the top. She attempted Everest again in 1994. Because of potential avalanche hazards, the team had to retreat without summiting. But Sandy wasn't deterred. In Vogue, reflecting on why she kept returning to high places, she wrote, "By now, you may legitimately question the sanity and health sense of the sport. More than anything, climbing Mount Everest is exercise for the soul." By 1996, Sandy Hill Pittman wasn't just some rich tourist buying her way up Everest. She was an experienced mountaineer with 2 previous Everest attempts under her belt, 6 of the 7 summits completed, and years of high-altitude experience across multiple continents. But here's the crucial context the media missed. 1996 marked a turning point for Everest. The mountain was entering what experts now call the commercial era. For the first time, paying clients could join expeditions led by world-class guides. This democratization of Everest created tension in the mountaineering community and made wealthy clients easy targets when things went wrong. Sandy wasn't alone in facing criticism. The entire concept of guided Everest expeditions was controversial. Traditional mountaineers viewed paying clients as diluting the purity of the sport. When disaster struck, it became convenient to blame the clients rather than examine the complex factors that actually caused the tragedy. Fellow expedition member Charlotte Fox would later defend Sandy. She took a lot of crap for not thanking people at the time for saving her life, but she's a strong, committed woman. Maybe she just didn't know how to say thank you for saving her life. David Bray Shears, the acclaimed filmmaker, had climbed with Sandy on her first Everest attempt in 1993 and respected her determination. By 1996, her expedition leader Scott Fisher described her as a competent climber who performed well and pulled her weight on the team. So, if Sandy Hill Pittman was this experienced, this prepared, this competent, what really happened on that mountain in May 1996? What turned a skilled mountaineer into the world's most hated climber? The answer lies not in Sandy's abilities, but in a perfect storm of circumstances that no amount of experience could have prevented. May 1996 on Mount Everest was unlike any climbing season before it. Over 300 people and 14 expedition teams had converged on the mountain, each with kitchens, stereos, satellite phones, and fax machines. The mountain had become a high-altitude city. Among Rob Hall's 8 clients that year was journalist Jon Krakauer, who had come to report for Outside Magazine on the growing and controversial popularity of commercial expeditions. But Krakauer wasn't the only one documenting the climb. Filmmaker David Bray Shears was on the mountain with his IMAX camera, capturing footage for the documentary Everest. Meanwhile, Sandy Hill Pittman was sending live updates from base camp to NBC's website. making her one of the first climbers to share dispatches from the mountain in real time. This cutting-edge approach drew intense media attention. But here's what the critics conveniently ignored. Nearly everyone on Everest that season was using modern communication equipment. Over 300 climbers, spread across 14 expeditions, had satellite phones, radios, and other devices to coordinate with base camp and document their progress. Yet somehow, only Sandy was criticized for embracing technology that was rapidly becoming standard on major expeditions, turning her into a symbol of the commercialization of climbing rather than recognizing her experience and skill. On May 10, 1996, the weather looked perfect. Multiple teams planned to make their summit bids simultaneously. Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants team, Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness team, Sandy's team, and several others began their final ascent. Sandy was climbing with some of the most experienced guides in the world. Scott Fisher had summited Everest without supplemental oxygen. Anatoly Bukriv was a legendary high-altitude climber. These weren't amateurs leading tourists. They were elite mountaineers at the top of their profession. The ascent began smoothly, but delays started accumulating. Traffic jams formed on the fixed ropes. Teams that should have been coordinating their efforts instead found themselves competing for position. Critical decisions about turnaround times, the point where climbers must descend regardless of whether they've reached the summit, were being ignored or delayed. Sandy reached the summit that day. So did most of her teammates. It was a glorious moment. Clear skies, minimal wind, the achievement of a lifetime. She had become one of the few people to complete the 7 summits, and she'd done it on the world's highest mountain. But as they celebrated on top of the world, a weather system was forming that would turn their triumph into tragedy. The descent began in deteriorating conditions. This is where most Everest deaths occur. Not on the way up, but on the way down, when climbers are exhausted and the mountain shows no mercy to those who linger too long in the death zone. What happened next wasn't caused by Sandy's inexperience or demands. It was caused by a rogue storm that meteorologists later described as a deadly outbreak of high-impact weather on Everest. The storm hit with unprecedented fury. Winds reached hurricane force. Visibility dropped to 0. Temperatures plummeted to levels that could kill in minutes. As Sandy would later describe it, I felt close to dying, but the hypoxia took over my brain, and I started hallucinating. I was actually sitting outside of a Tibetan tea house, and there are no Tibetan tea houses at 8,000 meters. Here's what actually happened during those crucial hours. Sandy ended up in a group stranded on the South Col, one of the most exposed and dangerous parts of the mountain. They faced an unimaginable nightmare. Walking would have meant stepping off cliffs into 1,000-foot drops on either side. In a miraculous but brief break in the weather, guide Anatoly Bukriv led some of the group to safety. He then sent out another guide to get the remaining climbers, including Sandy. After 10 harrowing hours exposed to conditions that killed 8 other people that night, she was rescued. But here's the crucial point that the media narrative missed. Sandy Hill Pittman survived because she was competent, not despite being incompetent. She had the experience to recognize hypothermia symptoms. She had the physical conditioning to endure 10 hours in the death zone. She had the mental toughness to stay conscious and responsive when others were succumbing to the cold. What happened to Sandy wasn't unique in mountaineering history. When disasters strike on the world's most dangerous peaks, there's often a rush to find someone to blame. Clients, especially wealthy ones, make convenient scapegoats. It's easier to point fingers at the person who paid for the expedition than to acknowledge that sometimes mountains simply kill people regardless of their experience or preparation. The 1996 disaster had multiple contributing factors: delayed departure times, traffic jams on the route, guide decisions about turnaround times, and most importantly, a storm system that was stronger than anyone predicted. These were systemic failures, not the fault of any individual climber. Tim Madsen, a fellow team member who helped keep Sandy alert during the ordeal, never blamed her for what happened. Anatoly Bukriv, who risked his life to save her and others, described her as capable and strong. Charlotte Fox, another survivor, also defended Sandy against the criticism. So, why did Sandy become the villain? In the aftermath of the 1996 disaster, media and public attention focused on her. Wealthy, visible, and female in a male-dominated sport. Jon Krakauer, reflecting on his own harrowing experience in Into Thin Air, described her in a way that some readers interpreted as emblematic of the commercialization of Everest, making her an easy target for criticism. Sandy Hill Pittman has expressed that, in the aftermath of the 1996 Everest disaster, she felt unfairly blamed by the media. Although Jon Krakauer was on Everest and experienced the tragedy firsthand, he wasn't with her team and didn't witness her every action. From her perspective, this distance contributed to a portrayal in Into Thin Air that made her an easy target for criticism. The truth is simpler and more tragic than the media narrative suggested. Climbers know the reasons they go to these places. It's the awe and the mystery. There's no one to blame when things go wrong. Nature is what nature is. 8 people died on Everest in May 1996, including 2 of the most experienced guides in the world. They died because a rogue storm hit the mountain with unprecedented fury. They died because high-altitude mountaineering is inherently dangerous, no matter how experienced or well-prepared you are. Sandy Hill Pittman didn't cause those deaths. She was simply another survivor of one of mountaineering's greatest tragedies, who happened to make a convenient scapegoat for a media hungry for someone to blame. Today, Sandy Hill Pittman continues to live the adventurous life that defined her long before 1996. From surfing to climbing volcanoes, her passion for exploration remains as strong as ever. At age 64, she competed in a CrossFit competition and came in 4th in her age group. She's even talked about returning to some lesser-known Himalayan peak, saying, "I can't resist the pull of the mountains." For nearly 30 years, Sandy Hill Pittman has carried the burden of being cast as Everest's villain. Her story reveals something disturbing about how we process tragedy and assign blame. When faced with the incomprehensible, 8 deaths on the world's highest mountain, we desperately search for simple explanations, clear villains, someone to hold responsible. But mountains don't care about our need for neat narratives. They don't distinguish between the wealthy and the poor, the experienced and the novice, the guided and the independent. On May 16, 1996, Everest killed indiscriminately, taking guides and clients, veterans, and newcomers alike. Sandy Hill Pittman's real story isn't about privilege or incompetence. It's about a woman who found freedom in the mountains at age 13 and spent her life pursuing that freedom with dedication, skill, and courage. She earned her place on Everest through years of training, multiple attempts, and genuine mountaineering achievement. The mountain knows the truth, even when the world chooses to believe a simpler story.